Everyone get ready, because today we are going deep on tariffs.
Ooh, tariffs.
Yes, specifically the ones that President Trump has in mind for Canada and Mexico.
Right.
And we're talking like really understanding what's going on here, because you've probably seen the headlines.
You've seen them.
But we're going way beyond the headlines with this Al Jazeera article from January 31st, 2025 called "Trump Pledges to Go Ahead with 25% Tariffs on Canada, Mexico from Saturday."
Wow, from Saturday. That's
Yeah.
that's coming up quick.
This weekend, yeah. And the thing that's so interesting about this is it's not just some like flash in the pan news story. This has been going on
Oh yeah.
since Trump's election back in November.
Right.
When he first kind of threw this idea out there.
Yeah, just floated it.
And now it's like, he's really serious.
Doubling down.
Yeah, and he's targeting Canada and Mexico and saying it's all about like undocumented migrants and illegal drugs.
Right.
But here's where it gets a little crazy.
Okay.
Oil imports from those countries might get like a pass?
Free path.
Yeah, and the article actually quotes him saying he'll decide based on the price.
So like playing it by ear.
Yeah. How do you even plan for that?
Right, like maybe we'll have tariffs.
When we're talking about something as big as oil.
Yeah, I mean, it's causing a lot of anxiety for people who watch these things, markets and things.
Yeah.
This isn't some,
Small potatoes.
yeah, like little thing. We're talking about Canada supplied over half of all U.S. crude oil imports
Wow.
in 2023, and Mexico another 11%.
So we're talking big.
Yeah, we're talking potentially huge price hikes at the pump. And then you've got all these ripple effects industries that rely on transportation, Who knows what could happen with two of our biggest trading partners?
Well, hold on, though. Wouldn't a spike in oil prices actually be good for U.S. oil producers?
Oh, interesting.
Like, couldn't that actually help boost domestic production?
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
You're right. There's definitely potential there for, U.S. producers to benefit, at least in the short term. But we got to think bigger picture,
Right.
Higher energy costs would hit consumers hard.
Right.
Could lead to inflation, like across the board.
Oh, whoa.
And it's not just a simple, plus and minus equation.
Okay.
The U.S. energy landscape is complicated. Even with more domestic production, we'd probably still need imports to meet all the demand.
So even if we like make more of our own oil, we're still tied to those global prices.
Yeah, essentially.
Okay, so let's say Trump goes ahead with these tariffs, oil or no oil. What are Canada and Mexico going to do?
Retaliate.
Yeah, what are we talking about?
They've said it loud and clear. They will fight fire with fire. Both countries have kind of hinted at retaliatory tariffs of their own.
Like what?
Targeting key U.S. exports, stuff like agricultural products and manufactured goods.
Like Mexican avocados.
Exactly.
Canadian lumber.
Yeah.
Oh, man, my grocery bill.
Right.
Okay, so is this just like an economic spat, or could it actually damage our relationships with Canada and Mexico?
That's where things get really tricky, right? Because imposing tariffs can definitely be seen as a hostile move, especially when it's with countries we consider allies and partners.
Yeah.
So there's a real risk of like straining those relationships, and that can make it harder to cooperate on other stuff too, like border security.
Which is what he says this is all about.
The irony, right?
It's like a tangled web, and we haven't even gotten to China and fentanyl yet.
Oh yeah, we got to get to that.
How does that fit
There's
in?
another layer of this whole thing, and it shows just how connected the global economy really is.
Right.
Trump's thinking about a 10% tariff on China.
Specifically because of fentanyl.
Yeah,
Right.
because he sees China as like the main source of this drug, which is, causing a lot of problems here.
So he's using tariffs to try and force China to like crack down on fentanyl production.
Exactly.
But China's not just going to be like, okay.
No, they're not going to take this lying down. They already pushed back. They're warning against protectionism.
What's that?
Protectionism that's basically like shielding domestic industries from foreign competition using stuff like tariffs.
Oh, okay.
They've called for win-win solutions, but it's clear they're not going to just sit there and do nothing.
So we're talking a potential trade war on two fronts, Canada and Mexico and maybe China.
Yeah, it's starting to feel like everyone's, scrambling for the lifeboats.
Yeah.
As this whole global trade ship starts to sink.
Oh, man.
Yeah. And it's like we haven't even talked about how this hits regular people yet.
Right. Like, what does this actually mean for like you and me?
Yeah, exactly. Because it's not just about like immediate stuff like, prices and trade. It's like a ripple effect that could hit American consumers and businesses like right in their wallets.
Okay, so walk me through that. How do tariffs on imports actually hurt the U.S. economy?
I would think it would be the opposite,
Right.
protect our industries, boost domestic production.
Yeah, that's the idea, but it's a lot more complicated than that.
You got to think about it like this. If the cost of imported stuff from Canada and Mexico goes up because of tariffs,
Mm-hmm.
American companies that need that stuff have to pay more for it.
Right.
And that increased cost gets passed along to everyone else, and that leads to higher prices for consumers.
So it's like tariffs trigger price hikes,
Mm-hmm.
and then suddenly everything costs more.
Exactly. From cars to groceries, everything gets more expensive, and then people start, tightening their belts.
Right.
And that means businesses take a hit.
Okay, so it's not just about the price tag at the store.
No, it's way more than that. Tariffs can mess with the whole system of supply chains.
Supply chains.
Yeah, a lot of American companies depend on parts or materials that come from Canada and Mexico.
Oh, right.
So if those imports get stuck because of tariffs, production could slow down, costs could go up, and businesses can lose their advantage.
So even if the goal is to protect American jobs and industries,
Right.
tariffs could backfire and actually make things worse.
That's what a lot of economists are worried about. It's a big gamble. And there's no guarantee that these tariffs will even do what they're supposed to do.
Like what?
Like, will they actually get Canada and Mexico to change their policies on border security or fentanyl trafficking?
Right.
And even if they do, will those gains be worth all the potential economic and diplomatic problems?
So if tariffs are such a, blunt tool, is there a better way to deal with these issues?
Well, a lot of experts think that instead of putting up these trade barriers,
Uh-huh.
we should be doubling down on diplomacy and cooperation.
Okay.
Working with Canada, Mexico, even China to find solutions that work for everyone.
So instead of us versus them, it's more like we're all in this together.
Exactly.
But how do you get everyone to agree when there are so many different interests?
It's definitely not easy. But historically, open dialogue and collaboration have been a lot more effective than economic warfare.
Give me an example.
Sure, take the original NAFTA agreement.
Okay.
It wasn't perfect,
Right.
but it created a system for cooperation and trade that helped all three countries for decades.
So maybe this whole thing with tariffs is a symptom of a bigger problem,
Yeah, like what?
like a shift away from that idea of global cooperation.
You're right. We're seeing more and more protectionist ideas all over the world.
Protectionist.
Yeah, it's like a retreat from globalization.
Mm-hmm.
Some people think that free trade has caused job losses and economic inequality,
Uh-huh.
and they see tariffs as a way to protect domestic industries and workers.
So everyone's feeling the pressure, and instead of working together,
Mhm.
they're turning inward.
Exactly, trying to protect their own turf.
But if everyone starts building walls, won't that hurt everyone in the end?
That's the danger, and it's not just about economics. This trend towards protectionism can have bigger consequences.
Like what?
It can fuel nationalism, erode trust between nations, and make it harder to solve global challenges,
Like what kind of global challenge?
like climate change or pandemics, things that need everyone to work together.
So the more countries retreat into their own little bubbles, the more distrustful and divided the world becomes.
Exactly. And that makes cooperation even harder.
It's like a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah, you could say that.
Okay, so we've talked about the potential fallout for the economy and diplomacy, but what about the average person? How could these tariffs affect someone's life here in the U.S.?
That's the big question, right? It's easy to get lost in these big discussions about trade policy.
Right.
But the reality is these decisions can really impact people's wallets, their jobs, their sense of security.
So if these tariffs happen, what should people be looking out for?
Well, keep an eye on prices. If you start seeing things getting more expensive, that could be a sign that tariffs are having an effect. Also, pay attention to news about businesses, especially those that rely on stuff from Canada and Mexico.
Okay.
Are they having trouble getting supplies?
Yeah.
Are they having to lay off workers or raise prices?
And what about the stock market? Could all this uncertainty cause a downturn?
It's definitely possible. Investors don't like uncertainty, and trade wars tend to create a lot of it.
Yeah.
If businesses start hurting because of tariffs, it could make stock prices go down.
So it's another ripple effect,
Mm-hmm.
but this time it starts with investors getting scared.
Yeah. And that can have a whole bunch of consequences.
Okay, so beyond the numbers, what about the political climate?
Right.
How are Canada and Mexico reacting?
Yeah, they're retaliating,
Uh-huh.
negotiations breaking down.
Right.
And what about China? Is the rhetoric heating up? Are we getting closer to a full-blown trade war on multiple fronts?
I feel like we're right on the edge of a cliff, and
Yeah.
no one knows if we're going to step back or just jump off. It's a lot.
it's definitely a lot to think about, and that's why it's so important to, stay informed and talk about these things.
Right.
Because in the end, the decisions that policymakers make affect everyone.
Yeah.
It's not just about numbers and statistics. It's about people's lives, their jobs, the kind of world we want to live in,
Okay, so we've talked about like all the bad stuff,
Mm.
but is there any good that could come from this?
That's a really good point. Even though tariffs usually get a bad rap,
Yeah.
sometimes they can have some unexpected benefits.
Okay, like what?
Well, for example, if tariffs make imported things more expensive,
Right.
it could give domestic industries a chance to step up and fill the gap.
Okay.
So we might see like a comeback in U.S. manufacturing,
Interesting.
that businesses take advantage of this new situation.
So maybe it's not all bad.
Right. Maybe this could actually be a chance for innovation and growth in some parts of the U.S. economy.
But wouldn't that take a while?
Yeah, probably.
We're talking about prices and jobs being affected right now versus like potential growth way down the line.
Yeah, that's the tough part, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's a balancing act. You have to weigh the short-term costs against the long-term benefits.
Right.
And there's always that risk that the solution could be worse than the problem itself.
It feels like we're in uncharted territory, like a
Yeah.
new era of global uncertainty. And it's hard to know how it's all going to play out.
We're definitely in a period of transition. Things are changing. The old ideas about free trade and globalization are being questioned.
Yeah.
And it's not clear what the new world order will look like.
Okay, so what's the main takeaway? What do you want our listeners to remember?
I think the most important thing is to stay involved,
Yeah.
stay informed, and really think about the information you're getting.
Okay.
There's so much out there, so many different opinions and agendas,
Yeah. Right.
Don't just take things at face value. Ask questions, challenge assumptions, and come to your own conclusions.
Because we're all part of this global economy.
Right.
And the choices our leaders make affect us all. The whole tariff thing is just one piece of a much bigger puzzle.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a really important piece, and it's worth paying attention to.
Absolutely. And remember, even though it can feel overwhelming, sometimes your voice matters.
Yeah.
Talk about these things, share your views, and hold your elected officials accountable.
Right.
The future of our world depends on it.
This has been a deep dive for sure.
Definitely a deep one.
We've explored the potential consequences of these tariffs, the risks to the economy and diplomacy, and how it could affect the whole world. We even talked about some potential benefits, like maybe more innovation and growth.
Yeah.
And now we leave you with this: in a world where things are always changing, the ability to adapt, to learn, and to have thoughtful discussions is more important than ever.